Are you sure the transfer papers are ready? He can't wake up and find out he still owns TechCore. Juliana Miller's voice sliced through the sterilized silence of the hospital room like a blade. She wasn't looking at the man lying in the bed, but at the reflection of her own jewelry in the wall mirror. If Arthur Sterling discovers that the angel investor he's been waiting for is actually the bride's father, the whole plan collapses. Robert Sterling, Juliana's father and the mentor behind the facade of a rising businessman, smiled coldly as he adjusted his cuff. Relax, dear. For all intents and purposes, Arthur is just a tech genius who went bankrupt before takeoff. He believes we're his salvation. Little does he know the wedding is merely the final signature on the contract that hands us his empire on a silver platter. Arthur Sterling heard every word. The world believed he was just a talented young entrepreneur, desperate for capital. The truth was that Arthur was already a silent billionaire, a man who had built a colossal fortune under pseudonyms and shell companies, amassing over $200 million far from the spotlight. He had chosen to pose as an ordinary man, almost on the brink of ruin, just to test whether Juliana's love was real or if she was simply another predator chasing status. The test, unfortunately, was an absolute success in the worst possible way. Fate has a twisted sense of humor. While Arthur planned to reveal his fortune on the night of the engagement, a car accident threw him into a state of vigilant coma. He was there, trapped inside his own body, while the woman he intended to crown queen of his empire discussed how to dismantle his assets. It's a betrayal so deep it hurts more than any physical wound, and while you process this shock with me, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment which city you're watching this twist from. Your support is what keeps this justice alive. Arthur could smell the antiseptic and feel the warmth of the lights, yet his eyes remained closed due to a paralysis the doctors called locked-in syndrome. He was a prisoner of luxury. Robert approached the bed and touched Arthur's shoulder with a false compassion that made the young man's blood boil. Such a shame, Arthur. You would have been a useful son-in-law, but now you're just a vegetative obstacle who needs to sign these documents before… Dr. Harrison, the corrupt neurologist we hired, declares your total incapacity. The cruelty was methodical. Juliana stepped closer, the expensive perfume Arthur had given her now acting as a trigger for nausea. She leaned in and whispered into his ear, "I never loved you, Arthur. I loved the promise of what you could become under my command. But since you broke ahead of schedule, I'll just take the pieces that are left." Arthur tried to scream. He tried to move a finger, trigger an alert, anything that would prove he wasn't an object. The claustrophobia of being conscious inside a dead body was suffocating. He heard the muffled laughter, the plans for how they would merge his company with the Miller's failing group, turning the sweat of his life into oxygen for his tormentors. They thought he was defeated, a discarded chess piece. But what Juliana and Robert didn't know was that Arthur wasn't just listening, he was processing. In his mind, he accessed every legal loophole, every encrypted password, and every vulnerability he himself had left in the company's system as a safeguard. Betrayal was the fuel he needed for what would come next. He didn't just want to wake up, he wanted them at the peak of their arrogance before pulling the rug out from under them. The promise was made in the silence of his mind. The truth would surface, and the price would be the total ruin of the Millers. But can you imagine what happens when a man everyone believes is dead begins to show signs that the game isn't over? Suddenly, a heart monitor began to beep in a rhythmic, accelerated pattern. Juliana stepped back, startled. Arthur's right index finger twitched violently. It wasn't a reflex. It was a command. His eyes snapped open, locking onto Juliana's with terrifying clarity. "The meeting isn't over yet, Juliana," Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse but charged with an authority that froze the air in the room. "And I heard every cent you tried to steal from me." The silence that followed was louder than the frantic beeping of the machines. Juliana stumbled backward, colliding with the bedside table and knocking over a glass of water that shattered on the floor. Her face, once a mask of arrogance, was now a map of pale terror. Robert, the patriarch who believed himself a master puppeteer, felt the air leave his lungs. Arthur Sterling was no longer an inert body. He was a judge with open eyes, radiating an icy fury that filled every corner of the hospital room. Arthur, darling, you're awake. Thank God. Juliana's voice came out shrill and trembling, a pathetic attempt to rebuild the facade that had just imploded. She stepped forward, hands outstretched as if she could erase the last few minutes with a forced embrace. We were so worried, talking about how much the company misses you. Save your breath, Juliana. I heard about Dr. Harrison. I heard about TechCore. And I heard exactly how you feel about me. Arthur cut in, his voice gaining strength with every syllable. He felt every muscle protest, excruciating physical agony after days of immobility, but the adrenaline of betrayal was a powerful anesthetic. He forced his torso upright, refusing Robert's help as the older man tried to maintain the posture of a protective father-in-law while hiding the transfer papers behind his back. Robert wiped the sweat from his forehead, forcing a nervous laugh. You must be confused. The medications cause auditory hallucinations, Arthur. We were just discussing how to protect your assets while you couldn't. Protect? You mean dissect, Arthur shot back, fixing his gaze on Robert. I'm not the brilliant bankrupt boy you thought you could manipulate. I'm the majority shareholder of Genesis Global, the company you're trying to save with my money. I already own 40% of its debt through funds you didn't even know existed. The impact of the revelation hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. Genesis Global was the conglomerate keeping the Millers breathing. Discovering that the man they tried to plunder actually owned their debt instantly turned the predator into prey. Juliana began to hyperventilate, her eyes darting between her father and the fiancée she had just sentenced to oblivion. At that moment, the door opened and Dr. Harrison Yaig entered, holding a clipboard with an air of professional indifference. When he saw Arthur sitting upright and lucid, he froze. The doctor looked at Robert, searching for instruction, a signal for how to proceed with the charade. Mr. Sterling, this is unexpected. I need to sedate you for further tests. You suffered severe trauma. If you touch me with a needle, Harrison, I guarantee your medical license will be the smallest of your losses, Arthur said, his voice low and lethal. I know how much the Millers paid you to falsify my incapacity report. I have the records of the transfers made to your Cayman account. My personal security system tracks every cent that comes into contact with my interests. The doctor stepped back, the briefcase trembling in his hand. He looked at the Millers, saw the desperation in Robert's eyes, and realized the ship was sinking. Without a word, Harrison turned and left the room, fleeing the impending disaster. Arthur looked at Juliana. She tried one last move, dropping to her knees beside the bed, tears, now real from fear, streaming down her face. Arthur, please. I was pressured. My father, the family debts. I panicked. I love you. I swear what you heard was desperation talking. Arthur felt a pang of sadness, not for lost love, but for the mediocrity of her character. He reached out and touched Juliana's face, a gesture she thought for a second was forgiveness. But he only brushed a strand of hair aside to look directly into her eyes. Your mistake was thinking my silence was weakness. I spent days in this bed building a courtroom inside my mind, and the sentence has just been signed. He grabbed the phone on the bedside table, the device Robert believed was locked, but which Arthur activated with a nearly imperceptible voice command. Now get out. Before the security team I just called arrives to remove the trash from this room. Robert tried to growl a threat, but his voice failed. He knew the game had turned. He pulled Juliana by the arm, and the two hurried out, leaving behind the man they thought they had destroyed. Arthur collapsed against the pillows, the physical effort taking its toll, but a cold smile appeared on his lips. The revenge wouldn't be physical, it would be financial, social, and absolute. He would let them try to run, try to hide the traces, only to discover that every door had already been locked from the outside. But how did Arthur plan to destroy an empire without firing a single shot, using only the very laws the Millers tried to twist? Arthur didn't waste a second. As soon as the door slammed shut behind the Millers' cowardly exit, he ripped the electrodes from his chest with a sharp movement. The pain was a vivid reminder that he was alive, and the anger was the fuel keeping him on his feet. He grabbed his laptop, hidden in the drawer of personal belongings, and accessed a command interface few in the world knew existed. His fingers flew across the keys, executing security protocols he himself had designed for moments of crisis. "Retaliation protocol active," the system whispered. Within seconds, Juliana's bank accounts, fed by corporate credit cards linked to Arthur's companies, were frozen. He watched with icy satisfaction as the status changed from active to blocked for fraud. She would discover it the first time she tried to pay for a taxi or a hotel. But the main target was Robert Miller. Arthur accessed Genesis Global's records and sent a mass email to the board of directors. The content was devastating. Audio recordings captured by the hospital room's monitoring system, remotely activated by Arthur through his phone, where Robert confessed the asset diversion plan and Dr. Harrison's involvement. Meanwhile, in the hospital corridor, Juliana tried desperately to call the family lawyer, but her phone was cut off. "Dad, my phone won't complete the call. What's happening?" she cried, panic rising in her throat. Robert tried to swipe his access card at the parking gate, but the barrier wouldn't lift. The screen displayed a simple message: "Access denied. Fraud detected." Inside the room, Arthur was now receiving a visit from Marcus Thorne, his trusted lawyer and head of cybersecurity. Marcus entered with a leather folder and a serious expression. "They fell into the trap, Arthur. Robert is trying to transfer the last funds from the family's emergency reserve to a Swiss account right now." Arthur gave a humorless half-smile. "Let him try, Marcus. I redirected the payment gateway. Every cent he attempts to move will land directly in the compensation fund for the employees he fired last month to cut costs. He'll finance his own downfall." The tension rose by the minute. Arthur knew the Millers would attempt one last desperate move: the physical destruction of evidence or a rushed escape. He needed to be faster. He got out of bed, his legs still trembling, and put on the blazer Marcus had brought. The dying patient had truly died. In his place stood the financial shark no one saw coming. "Call the police and the medical board about Dr. Harrison," Arthur ordered, walking toward the window overlooking the parking lot. Down below, he saw Robert gesturing violently at a hospital security guard. "And Marcus, notify the press that Genesis Global will undergo a drastic leadership change within hours. I want the Miller name associated with scandal before sunset." The claustrophobia that haunted him in the coma had been replaced by absolute clarity. He was no longer the victim. He was the architect of the chaos about to collapse over the heads of those who betrayed him. Robert Miller thought he was playing chess against an unconscious man, unaware the entire board belonged to his opponent. Arthur left the room, walking firmly despite his pallor. Each step down the hospital corridor sounded like a verdict. He passed reception and saw Juliana sitting on a bench, crying and uselessly trying to make her tablet work. She looked up and saw him, not the vulnerable fiancé, but the ruthless billionaire she had never truly known. "Arthur, please, can we talk? It was all a misunderstanding. I can explain." She started running toward him, but Marcus Thorne stepped between them like a wall of granite. Arthur didn't even stop. He simply looked over his shoulder and said, "Save your explanations for the judge, Juliana. You wanted my empire? Well, you've just earned a front-row seat to watch it burn." But Arthur's true final move had not yet been revealed. He had information that would destroy not only Robert Miller's fortune, but his freedom forever. What did Arthur discover in Robert's secret files while he was asleep that would turn this revenge into something far darker? The roar of Arthur's armored SUV echoed in the garage, yet the silence inside the vehicle was absolute. He watched in the rearview mirror as Juliana's figure shrank on the hospital sidewalk, a silhouette of despair in a designer dress now worth nothing. Arthur opened the file, Project Lazarus, on his tablet, a hidden folder he had mined from Robert's servers while the villain believed his fiancée was a vegetable. "Marcus, have you seen this?" Arthur pointed to a series of inflated transfers to a shell company called Apex Solutions. "Robert wasn't just trying to steal my company. He's been laundering money from the construction cartel for 5 years. He used my name and TechCore's structure as a shield for federal crimes." The betrayal wasn't only emotional, it was an attempt at framing. Robert planned to let Arthur wake up in a prison cell while he enjoyed the fortune on an island without extradition. Juliana's cruelty was only the tip of the iceberg of a family criminal operation. The final confrontation happened in the atrium of Genesis Global's headquarters. Robert Miller stormed into the building shouting, trying to regain control, but found the lobby filled with federal agents and TV cameras. At the center of the chaos stood Arthur Sterling, immaculate, his arms still bandaged, but his gaze, that of an executioner. "Arthur, what have you done? You're going to destroy all of us," Robert roared, held back by two agents. "No, Robert, I'm just cleaning house," Arthur replied, stepping close enough that only his former father-in-law could hear. "I handed Apex's records to the prosecutors 10 minutes ago. Dr. Harrison already confessed you blackmailed him into keeping me sedated. The game is over." Juliana appeared right behind him, trying to dodge the cameras, but the press quickly surrounded her. The mask of the suffering fiancé finally fell when she saw the handcuffs being placed on her father. She made one last attempt, a pleading look toward Arthur, but he simply turned away with icy contempt. The fall was swift, public, and broadcast nationwide. Weeks later, Arthur stood in his penthouse, watching the city lights. He recovered every cent, cleared his name, and saw the Millers sentenced to decades behind bars. His physical rehabilitation was slow, but his soul was at peace. He learned that true power isn't in what you own, but in who you can trust when the lights go out. Arthur Sterling's life took a new direction. No more disguises, but with a wisdom money could never buy. He transformed TechCore into a foundation supporting victims of corporate crime, turning his pain into a legacy of justice. Arthur's story teaches us that the truth can be silenced for a time, but it never dies. Character is tested in the dark, and those who try to build empires on the ruins of others are always buried by their own debris. Justice may take time, but for those with patience and intelligence, it arrives with the force of a hurricane. I hope this journey of resilience and strategy kept you hooked from beginning to end. Now, comment which part of the video you liked most, and what you would do if you were in Arthur's place. Until the next story.